Using school censuses to inform your family story is really a favorite of mine. When I look at uh, the fact that we have decennial censuses every 10 years in the United States, and I know Canada has them, uh, the United Kingdom across all of its countries has them. Most countries have them in some format. And even more countries in the Orient are coming online every year. And they've done their censuses differently. But most places, I'm going to tell you, have some form of school census. We are really fortunate that we have the kind of school censuses that we have. I'm in a second screen. What do you need to know and why? Hopefully, one of you can wave at me and say, yes, you can see that screen. Yep. Okay. We are set, ladies. This is great. What do you need to know and why? I think that your information about what it is possible to research in genealogy and in history is something that you can ever increase. And it's really important that you do that because you're going to open yourself to all kinds of records. Every time I hear that the state legislature is creating a law, I have to look at it and say, ooh, I don't know about that one. Or, yeah, that looks pretty good. Because remember, every time a law is created, there's records. And they are usually kept for a specified time. In fact, some of them are what we call a permanent record, and they can really help you increase your knowledge as you're looking at the local context. The school census worldwide is usually an annual count, and your ancestor, someplace, is going to be on a list for a certain specified time during that year. Frequently in Europe, we see that it is in the fall, just as ours is. We have about a 30-day period in September, October, in which we take ours. And then we update it again in Montana, actually, in April. And that's a pretty much an informal thing. It just keeps the legislature informed, even if they happen to not be in session. But we have the data for them so they know what's going on with schools. You can get the names of kids, their age, their birth date, their parents, their mom's names. I can't tell you how important that is, especially when you find those ladies in the 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, and 1920s just described as Mrs. Washburn, Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Smith, or whatever. You will find their date there because guess what? Our state law specified that they had to use the wife's name, not the husband's, for her part of the information. So that's very cool. So this background information can really help you as you're looking at your family from year to year, especially if you're in a rural area. But otherwise too, I mean, watching people move in and out of Great Falls, I am aware because I was the demographics technician, whatever, for the school district for a long time, that we had about 25 to 30% of our kids move each year, even up through 1996. People were moving in the city or moving out, moving back in or whatever. So it's very important that you know when that school census is taken so that you might catch your family in there. An important thing for you, if you happen not to catch your family in a certain year, like my family did not get caught in the Flathead County Census in 1941-42 because we don't know why. The person just didn't record it, and suddenly in 1943 said, oh, they're there. But on a census card for my brother, you'll see it a little later, it's marked as, oh, they came in 1940-41. So knowing that these things exist in some format, sometimes states don't take them every year, or they didn't right after the Civil War. But knowing that these things are yearly and that you should be able to find some kind of evidence for them is really important. We'll talk a little bit today about things that are alternatives that you can use, meaning you'll get the kid, you won't necessarily get the age or the date of birth, and you won't necessarily get the parent, but there are some other things that you can do. School reunions and all school reunion books for these small towns like Highwood or Fort Benton or whatever are wonderful sources. So questions you should be asking is, first of all, did that school district or that county or that state government in Rhode Island mandate the collection of school district data? And if so, what did they specify for a time? Because you had to get it down to a point. You're going to see a study that was done in 1910, a very fascinating study that I found that showed that at that point, literally, people were attempting and doing good things with school censuses. It's just that it was not in any way a formula for each thing, or not in any way a standardized process that could be used across the states. We don't get to that till quite a bit later. In the US Census, if you're remembering some of my studies from before, the US Census actually happened with that. And when you get this data, please, please enter it into your genealogical records for every year you find each person. I have people come in and say, oh, I found one of those records, I guess it's okay. This is not a sampling of records. This is being thorough so you have the best information about your family. School census laws track growth and the decline of school populations for the states and the legislatures and the US government. That's why it's important. Right now, we're seeing a president who thinks he wants to sink the education department. And I'm saying to my US reps and my US senators, please don't do that. This is where we get our uniform definitions. And it took them until 1996, folks, before we got all the definitions across all the states. It's important that we keep those. It helps us to track individual students and provides a uniform means to safely and securely do student data and student records. Remember, when you come into legislature, you might not realize that those things exist for a purpose to make your job easier when you're trying to figure out how much money to give to schools. It collects data for school funding appropriations, distribution of funds in each statute across each state, and it allows every state to see the other state's data under one umbrella all year long for anything that is needed. And it helps to distribute certain mandated funds, like funds for poor kids, funds for special education, etc. So it's a really good thing. That's my sermon. I'm done. So they are an every year phenomenon. They're invaluable, first of all, in establishing the geographic context of your family across years. They have been used successfully on delayed birth certificates to prove when that birth occurred. They have been used in courts of law to prove that certain kids who appeared in those school district record books with their age and their parents for that year as lawfully in that school district, they have been used to prove parts of wills, who gets the money, who doesn't. So you should be thorough. Record them across all the years you can find them. It's exhausting, I know. Sometimes the census is going to informally even note when a parent, usually, sometimes a child, but not very often, when a person is deceased. In Montana, I could kick them because instead of recording the parent as Norris Brown deceased, they just put in deceased. So you're going to have to look in previous years to find that guy's name. And you, of course, also want to compare them to any decennial census data you have, because both of them are going to help. And guess what? They're going to ask for different information. Remember, in Montana, the only time we asked for, and the only time across all 50 states that the United States asked for the month and the year of a birth was in 1900. The rest of the time, you have to find that information elsewhere. So school censuses will give you that information. Just to show you that primary school censuses take part across the world, this is in Bangladesh, and they actually report it out, and it becomes part of a United Nations effort and record. By the way, the UN also uses this data across nations in the limited fashion that it can. You need to get some basic info about the public schools in the area you're going to research. Say that you're in Arizona, which was a territory for a long time before it became a state. you need to find out what territorial rules worked for the territory of Arizona. I can tell you that they were somewhat looked kind of eastern United States each, but you need to be aware that in Arizona, in New Mexico, in California, sometimes the law looked a little different when it was first written down, simply because the Spanish had been there first, and they had their methods of recording the same information. And the current record then for a year, say in 1890, would definitely be influenced by the type of data taken before. So be aware of that. Look at the geographic specifications. Most school districts are decided as answering to, at least to get started, they are started by county commissioners at the request of parents who say, it looks like there's enough kids in our area and we need a school. And then who operated those public schools in a county? And how much was compulsory in terms of a school term? Maybe 18 weeks, getting started early. Early on in the 1890s and up through 1910 about, you need to look and recognize that, especially in the West, that there might be 3-month and 6-month compulsory school terms, because that's all they could afford at that point, or that's the only thing they could get a teacher for, or whatever. So be aware of that. And it will change from year to year. Note the age limitations for who could attend. In Montana, right from the very start, kids could attend if they were 6 and above, all the way to the age of 21. So when you see in school reunion books in the 1920s, even into the 1930s, that some students as seniors in high school were 21 going into the age of 22, that was usual. Today, usually you only see special education students doing that. So note the records, and note that the records are kept in counties. They're supposed to be kept forever, or they find a place to store them. In Cascade County, we happen to be the storage unit. The Great Falls Genealogy Library is the storage unit, although we know that the Cascade County commissioners are the ultimate owners of that information. But we keep the data and index it and do the neat things because it's a real benefit to us all. I'm just going to talk briefly about some great sources. I've talked before about Family Search as a fantastic resource, just using their research wiki, and you can do counties, you can do states, you can do information across counties and countries. You can use the United States Historical Society sites at each state. For instance, we have a thing called the Montana History Portal, where lots of stuff is free, and you're going to find school records there. You're going to find one today that I show you that will just blow your mind, I hope. So there are portals, and by the way, they've been able to establish those portals usually through the Library of Congress, just watching where your federal money goes again, the good things that it does, because it gives states a place to get things not only collected, but also digitized over time so the records are saved. They are just doing their jobs. Well, here's the one that blew my mind. Out at the Montana History Portal, I found this catalog of the Helena graded schools from 1879 through 1882, 3 volumes. 3 early books about Helena. And remember, we didn't become a state till 1889, so you're looking at territorial records. So here it is. This set is from Helena for the year 1879-1880. It's a catalog of the Helena graded schools for those years. It's a superb example of a substitute for a school census at that part, because I don't know if Helena has their records that early in terms of school censuses. They may be there, but this is a nice one to be able to look at in the first place. It gives you the records in there for the Helena Grammar School, for what they call the first intermediate school, beginning at probably about grade 3, and the second intermediate school, and so on. And it gives you the names of the kids and what class they were in, which is so cool. And then it'll also tell you their teachers' names, by the way. Always a good thing to be able to write about. It tells you about teachers and principals and the high school grads for 1879, and then it names every single student who entered that high school in the fall of 1879. I am telling you, this is a treasure, and it's available for free out online. If you find these things ever someplace and they're not out there free, take it post haste to somebody, send it to your state so they will digitize it and get it out there for all of us. Here's that West Side school that they had. There's evidence that they had probably 5 schools in 1879 in Helena, besides the commercial schools, for business and so on. But look at the bottom. They also had a colored school. 9 kids, several families attending their very own school, colored school, and it was sponsored by the county. In Great Falls, I discovered that those kids were attending our regular schools, but our indigenous Indian children were attending in a West Side facility. So look, every single one of these schools will be different in terms of what you find. Leland P. Cade, and I assume he is gone now, but he did some things for Golden Valley County, which is a very small county. He collected stuff everywhere, and he finally did a detailed record. It's a book of 71 schools in Golden Valley County, pictures, stories, facts, newspaper clippings, listings of all the students, etc. And did he probably get them all? No, but this is going to be a fantastic substitute. So basic information across the states, taken each fall, recording ages 0 to 21. And what's wonderful is many times you'll find that they're no longer in school, but they said he's working. She's working here. She's a maid down at the Big Fork Hotel. She's or whatever. So stuff gets in there. You want to look at every single record because they were mandated by the legislature. They record these students in a 1-month period, so they will never record the students for the whole year. You'd have to get a teacher's register book for that. That's what has that information as kids come in and out of schools. And by the way, we happen to have all the teacher register books for all of the 99 small school districts in Cascade County right here in our library. And do those records get used a lot? Yes, they do. It will record the children in that school's attendance area no matter whether or not the school is public or private. So if you had Catholic schools, the kids are in all likelihood still going to be in that public county census. And they were used to document the need for school funding. And also by 1910, 1911, we got interested in different types of child welfare, just in terms of kids being in school when they were supposed to be, for instance. That was a biggie across all of the states. Now remember, that school census will never add students in after October 15. It won't record those going out of the district, but it will tell you where people were at certain times. So it also serves as a great reference point for you with regard to where parents had a residence. You can use it for that particular thing. So you use it for more than recording the kids. You use it to record the parents for that amount of time. And hopefully then, for the next year and so on. So you can make some inferences about how long they were in a community. This is Nystrom's study of 46 states in 1910. I was just thrilled when I found this because he did this study across 46 states, and it was the first one that was done. And he found there was a wide variation just because people were operating on the knowledge they had in their state or what they felt was fair for their state. So the age of the child was required in 38 states, but not in the 48 that would have been available. The birth date is required in only 9 of those states. Montana was one of them. The birthplace of the child was required in 3 states. Montana did not require the birthplace, so you had to find that elsewhere. The child's gender was required. Yep. in most all of these, 25. The child's color was required in 14 states, not in Montana. Nationality was required in 7. Literacy level and whether or not kids were actually attending school. However, Montana was one of only 25 states that required the names of the parents and the address of the parents. And we went a step further. We said that a woman could not be identified as Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Atwater, or whatever. It had to be her Christian, get this, Christian name. Yes, that was in the law. Geographic distance from schools. You can see a whole bunch of things that were required. Vaccination data in one state in the East. Know that if they were state institutionalized in a state like maybe a school for the blind, they were excluded from local data. Wow, that's, so you have to find that data back in the census record, the US Census record instead. And until 1923 in Montana, Indians were excluded if the Indian parents were untaxed. In 1923, they get citizenship, and that changes. Number and name of taxpayers, students employed, and their employers. Remember, in the U.S. censuses from 1870, we had been asking about blind, deaf, dumb, feeble-minded, and so on. And 7 of the states were still asking about that. If deaf, 19, primarily because they had schools. They wanted to get those kids to those deaf and dumb schools, deaf and blind. 12 states classified the names by ages, meaning if you had a student, and Montana was one of these, if you had a student age 6 through 21, you were classified on one list, and that stood right into the 60s, 1960s, when we could classify those students easily still and do a computerized report. Then we didn't need to have a separate list. We could have it all in one. But if you were 0 to 5, you were recorded on a separate list, usually in ours that we found in Cascade County. They were at the back of our books. And we have a wonderful, wonderful volunteer of the year for 2023 who spent 2.5 years making an index of those indices so that we could find the kids where we needed to find them across all of those books that we have. Notice there were special groups, illiterates over 12. I could not find the definition that they had for illiterate. 16 states allowed the state superintendent to ask other census data. Montana didn't do that, but it had the right by legislature. So some states used census trustees. They were done by a variety of people, by the census marshal. And remember, we had census marshals for the US Census at least up through the 1840s, 1850s. They were taken at varied intervals. 37 states took them annually by 1909, 1910. That's a pretty good thing to see. There were a few others, the decennials, the every 5 years, the quadrennials, and so on, but most of them were taking them. And the purpose of this man's study was, of course, to show those states what others were doing so that we could normalize and formalize the data across all the schools in the United States. It was a very slow undertaking. I'm not going to go over this too much because if you're here today, you're getting this right after we're done today. So where these can be found, mainly in Montana, you're going to see that they were kept in the counties. There's always a copy in the county and then one sent to the state. And hopefully you're going to be able to find those school census records in these counties. Again, today, states still get all of this information. Congress gets all of this useful information, and it provides research reports immediately. When it gets the data today, it literally takes about a week to turn the data around and turn it into to comparisons, data comparisons across all the states. So states get this information by December 30th of every year. They have this available to begin to compare and see what's happened. I'm still waiting to see the data. I want to see the data in the COVID years to see what happened. But I know that based on the studies already done on the COVID years, we know why we have to have the extra money for kiddos who lost a lot during that 18 months of COVID problems. There's a condition of education mandated annually by Congress. There's all kinds of things that you can look at nationally to see how we compare and how other places compare. And by the way, there's the same thing internationally. Today in Montana, most counties do have their data back to the time of county creation. Some of them have given those older reports to local museums, or they have given the care of them to an organization like ours. But I can tell you that they still are officially responsible at the county level for all of that data, no matter that their school started in 1879 or 1979. In Montana, I want to concentrate just a little bit on 1911, because this is immediately after that study. And we had laws that said that those who could attend in Montana, kids between the ages of 6 and 21 residing in the school district, and boards of trustees at that point had the power to admit other kids not residing in their district. It also means they had the right not to admit them unless tuition was paid. So that's an important distinction for you. Compulsory attendance by 1913 was kids between the ages of 8 and 14 had to be in school for the entire time of the compulsory term of school. If they were not, they would be turned in, and usually someone from the county would go after them to get them back in school. This becomes very important because you're going to see that state laws changed based on who could work at 14, 15, 16, and so on, and did they need to be in school? Yes, they did. I want you to look for information bleeds in anything you find across any state. A strike through on a state, on a census, you should still record. It means that sometime during that time in which the district collected that information, that name came up, and then for some reason they struck it out, meaning they may have moved recently. It's an important cue for you. Don't ignore these cues. And remember that any information on any official document is only as good as the effort made to follow the law. You're going to find problems with records sometimes. Yes, they had to record the name of the student. It didn't mean they had to spell the name correctly. Or sometimes checking off the improper gender or whatever, and you know that it's something else. Copy it as you found it, and then make your judgment and write your little statement. Try to find that original information. I'm going to show you information I've been working across in Flathead and Lake County for one little joint school district, and the errors I've found, the things that are there, and what I've done with the information. You could get wonderful information, though. In 1911, our Great Falls Public Schools and our Helena schools and our Bozeman schools, our Billings schools had this kind of information if you go look for it. Children totaled under the age of 6 by boy and girl. Children ages 6 through 8, boys and girls. Children ages 8 to 14, boys and girls. Kids ages 14 to 16, boys and girls. And 16 to 21, boys and girls. And for us, we had a north side total, including the orphan schools that we had in Great Falls for that particular thing. That was an important thing in our particular county. Look at those county records, because you are going to get notes that are attached, written around the edges of things. These were notations made by school superintendents or by others who were responsible for the records. I'm going to note right away that in 1911, I'll tell you right now that in your districts, widows were noted, but widowers were not. So it's just and they were recorded as a widow woman. So the surnames were difficult to ascertain because sometimes the assumption was made that the kids were going under a step-parent's name. So watch for that. The exact relationship of a child to a parent or a guardian was inferred by the surname of the parent. Watch for that. And it's going to be usually a copy of the original census, because remember, in order to get this done in a big town like Great Falls, about 10,000 people at that time, they had to have 7 census takers walking the street to get it done, to go to every single town or every single building or place. That means they had to go to the boarding houses, they had to go everywhere. So we get our totals, and we also get the neighborhood descriptors, which are a really nice thing for you. Look at those neighborhood descriptors in Bozeman. You had a couple of schools. Look at those neighborhood descriptors if you're in Helena, or you're down in Casa Grande in another state, in Arizona or whatever, because the neighborhood informal descriptors will be there. That's how they got those 7 people to go out in our city and get the information and not overlap. And remember, kids 0 to 5 or 0 to 6, in our case, for 1 year, it overlapped, 0 to 6 and then 6 to 21. You must remember to look in 2 places to be able to get all the names of your kids. So you're going to have to look through. This is the wonderful thing that Diana Carroll did for us in terms of finding all those places where the data began over in all of our books. And I could note and say, hey, in 1911, in our town with about 10,000 people, we had lots of schools. In addition to the schools that are in Boldface, we had some others. We had the Field Station School. Today, that's in what we call the Meadowlark area. We had a St. Mary's Catholic School with 185 kids that were attending that were listed in the public census. We had a Great Falls Commercial College, which would take those kids that were 14, 15, and 16 and rejuvenate them one-on-one in terms of reading and mathematics so that they could enter a commercial business and work. We had a training school. We had all kinds of things. Note anything that's unique to any of the censuses you see. Like in 1911, the State Commissioner of Child Labor for Montana, and across all the other states, that was a new position within states. And they would get a list of all the kids under the age of 17 so that they could determine which kids were actually in school when they saw those teacher registers. So we had 2 businesses taken to court in 1911 promptly, the Western Union Telegraph and Cable, and another one, the Post Office Telegram and Cable Companies, went to court. I've given you those handouts. They are in your originals already that you've got, and it'll show you that they were taken to court and said, you can't employ these kids. And even when they said, but the kid needs a job because his dad's dead and whatever, they said, no, the kid needs to be in school. And that was, you will see these things being fought over the years as people said, I'm sorry, my kid needs to be out of here, which eventually comes to the place where we're talking about you must have completed 8th grade and be 16 to no longer attend public school. So my needs for the Little Ferndale School District up by Big Fork, Montana, this is a joint school district across Flathead and Lake from 1910, 1911 through about 1976 before it collapses and goes entirely into the Big Fork district. But it's still, the students are paid for from 2 sides of those county lines, Lake County and Flathead County. I wanted to record each student each year where the information was available, so I needed the school censuses, and I found 2 different kinds, even though in this district there was only 1 clerk, and she gave the same information written in the same way to both counties. The 2 counties did different things with it. I wanted to use the guardian and parent data as a way, as a reference point for who actually lived in there. And there was no community directory, by the way. Even in the city directory out of Flathead County, they just listed people in the rural free delivery, which went on for miles and miles, like 20 some miles. And it was across both counties. I had to recognize by looking at the data that only 70 to 75% of the kids or the residents in 1911 would have children ages 0 to 21. In other words, there would be other people in the community. So I was not going to get all the names of the residents early on, but I had to make a start somewhere because I'm writing a book about the school district itself. And so I had the advantage for what was needed in Montana, as listed here. Notice that the name of the mother or guardian, they said Mrs. Sam Good is not acceptable. You have to have Lucretia Good as her name, for example. And by the way, the school clerks were held responsible to get that information. They were to get it. This is what a school census report looks like when you look at it out online for free at Family Search. All of them are available up through the early 70s out there every single year for every school district. Bless them. They are out there. And ours will be, we hope, in the future. Note that the district clerk of the school district was compelled to write the report. This is what one of them looks like. It's fair handwriting, and by the 20s, most of it is typewritten, so it's pretty fair. And note that here's my other confounding problem. I know that these kids are in Flathead County, just the Flathead County kids for this school, and their address is Big Fork. It doesn't say Ferndale, it doesn't say rural route, because they were allowed to put in the closest available place for mail. So it's a confounding problem. Here's what I was able to do in my program that I use in Roots Magic. I knew that Paul Kitzmiller was one of the first kids in the community by about early in 1908, his parents came there and they had a homestead. So I could record his birth as in Waterville, Wisconsin, because I was able to find that on a separate record. Remember, it wasn't required early on. I could record him every year from his age of 6 through his age of 19 because he was recorded in that school census in some way as either working out of school, whatever, or so on, but he was there. I also recorded him twice when he was 15 because in October he was 15 when the school census was taken, and in January 1920 when the US census was taken, he was still 15. That's a valid record. Put them both in. This is what I do with that record. By the way, I've done this for every single student found in that district. Hey, some nights you can't sleep. So you go look at records. You have to be aware of the limitations of what happens when a school district continues as a school, but it becomes a joint school district and 2 counties are paying for it. So the school clerk, there would be only one school clerk, that's all there is. She or he has to record the students separately by their counties. And the school board also accounts for the activities for those students by their counties. By the way, I found it fascinating that Flathead and Lake split the duties by having the health officer, the doctor, and his nurse come up once a year from Lake County, and then the next year it would be Flathead County and so on to take the weights and measures and whatever's for kids. Other counties will do it differently, I guarantee you. Another confounding limitation in Ferndale is people were very poor there. They moved back and forth across those county boundaries with impunity. Most families were renters for usually anywhere for $2 to $5 a month, right up through about 1954, when they start going up to about $10 to $25 on a house. Only 40% owned their land or were buying it at any one time. That was the most that I found up through 1974. So I had to admit those limitations straight up in the first place so that people who read my book understand what the limitations are, what I could do and what I couldn't do with the data I had. So Here's me. I was Janet Denise Lee. I was recorded as living in Flathead County on the Flathead County side beginning October 46. I was 5 months old on that title, and I'm recorded all the way up through the age of 12. It should actually be there as 13. I don't know what happened to the card for, or the information on the card that I had for when I was 13, but I left that school in late January 1960, moved to Billings for 6 months, and then that year moved back to Polson. So by the fall, I was back in Lake County again, never having it mentioned that I was in Billings, even though I was there for a semester. Be aware of those things. And I'm looking and acknowledging and saying, in October 54, we moved to Kalispell for a month or so, a couple months actually. Probably through the summer and the first month. And so there was no record because I wasn't there in October. But by November, I was. I was back in that school. So be aware of differences. Those two school districts became joint across the two counties. And I'm going to tell you right now, Mrs. Wemma Moose was one of the first settlers in the community. And she began taking the data about the 5th or 6th year that the school district was in order. And she kept at it until her daughter took over in the 50s. And be aware, I told you Flathead County continued writing the original handwritten records. So you have a chance every year of either some mistakes or correcting a mistake. And she did that. But Lake County got the original records by recopying her info, and they put it on individual cards. Now, every single time you transfer information, you risk creating a mistake. And those individual cards were recopied by name so that you could have opportunities for surname, correct misspellings, incorrect copying of birth dates, ages, parents, all kinds of things. So you need to be aware of that. I'm still trying to get the people in Lake County to let me have a go at the records which they think are in the basement and were the original books, but I haven't achieved that yet. Well, here's my cousin Ron. I can tell you his name was Ronald Roy Higgins, and he was born on July 1, 1947, and they recorded him in the fall of 1948. He was there for a month, and then he went to Havre for a year in that year. And so even if he was age 1 and being recorded there on that card, there were problems. So you can see what this looked like. I can tell you that right through 1968, this card was never corrected for his name. Here's a bigger one. My brother, Gary Byron Lee, was born May 26, 1939, but was recorded by Ferndale, first recorded by Mrs. Moose. She got it wrong and kept it, and then recorded, not verified as it was supposed to be, for April 29 of 1939. Never, right through the time he was 21 and went off the record, was that card changed. So be aware that when records get changed, it's a problem. I've had to create my own school censuses based on students and where they were from these cards. And this is what I've done to put the information together so it's a little easier for parents to read. They can have the card too if they want it, but only on a thumb drive. And you'll note sometimes I have information I can't fill in. But I've done it for every year beginning 1923 through 1974, I believe is when the records stop. Be aware of where you can find information. I was looking for a relative when I found this book down in Sonoma County, California, the 1930 school census. I'd found the families. I figured that the kids I needed were there, but I couldn't find them. And I didn't find them in this book either, meaning even though their story said that they came in 1930, their parents had been there in 1929. I found that in a directory. The kids didn't come till later from Miles City, Montana. So what did I have to do? I had to go look up the Miles City records. I did find them. There are books that you can look for at Abe Books, at Amazon Books. A great one for these kinds of things is a thing called Forgotten Books. It's another place to look for these things. Just use, in quotation marks, School Census. You'll be surprised at what you'll find. If that doesn't work, using quotation marks, School Reunion Books. It will help you. Boulder, Colorado, this lady, Dina Carson, has done 70 of these books across the county, one for each and every school. And they are available out at Amazon, I believe. Texas has these things, a state census of school children in 1854, 1855. Why is that important? Remember, during the times that they were a republic. So you're going to want to, if you're looking, you have to look for different kinds of records again. And you might have to look across separate studies done of white children, colored children, indigenous people, and so on. Don't forget to throw those in. Chester, Montana had an all high school reunion during the summer of 2000. It's probably some of the best data I've seen. We collect student reunion data here deliberately for all of Montana at our library, our Great Falls Genealogy Society library. So if you've got some of this and you know that it's there, we are happy to take it and put it in there, the county area for that particular county. This one does all of the graduates, but also looks at, for instance, the kids who dropped out. And you'll see those frequently in some books. But this is a very nice one, a printed one that was available. So be aware of these kinds of things and what's available to you. West Virginia is famous for these. Massachusetts is famous for these. You will not find as many in southern states because, again, they had the confusion over what a public school was and where their kids would go. Once separate but equal schools fell down the cracks through the Supreme Court in 1954. So you have to look different places for different information. You can always look each year in the newspapers to find the graduates. You also, if you want to put in a special one that I found that's really neat across all 50 states, is kindergarten graduation. Every year you will have that, and they will do more than the public schools. There will be kindergarten graduation across many things, so you can collect a lot of information that way for the kids that are in certain age groups. In our library, this is, yes, we admit it, it's a little cluttered, but those things happen. On the right side of this picture, you see those boxes. They are boxes full of all of the teacher registers, the clerk of the school district clerk, and the board members, all of their oaths of office, etc., for all 99 of our small school districts. Any data that the county had. We are the custodians. We are not the owners. We are the custodians, and we have worked to make sure that those things are indexed so people can find them. These boxes of info are very important boxes for schools coming up on their 100th anniversary, even if the school isn't there anymore. Or, for example, the top boxes on this end, the two top boxes on this end, are boxes of information kept for the schools that were eventually ceded over to Judith Basin County in the 1920s. We have people come in and use that data all the time.